Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us for this backstory about two of my pieces with one of my most favorite flutists and collaborators, Lindsey Goodman. She has recorded two of my pieces, For the Fallen and Penelope's Song. And we'll be talking about those, but also in general, Lindsey's work as a champion of new music, who was drawn to not only acoustic music, but also to experimenting with and performing quite a bit of new electroacoustic music. So I'd like to start with a question to Lindsey. How did you even get into this way of working with the flute?
That's a great question. So I was a student at the Manhattan School of Music in New York. I was getting a degree in orchestral performance, of all things, and I heard a wonderful concert by the flutist Patty Monson, who was on faculty at the time. And she gave a concert of all electroacoustic music. And until that point, I didn't even know such a thing existed. But there she was on stage, just her and her flutes and a whole bunch of pedals and microphones and cables and computers. And the next day I went to the School of Music's library and took out every single recording I could of any electroacoustic music for any instrument because I was just so enamored of this idea. And I spent the next semester just listening to all of this stuff. And I really became enamored with the medium because it seems so important to the world we live in. Look, right now we're meeting on Zoom, right? We're not even in the same state, and yet we can connect through the magic of technology. We've got our smartphones and our laptops and our social media and our email, and we're using it 24/7, 365. So to leave technology out of our art making seems to be a little disingenuous for the experience our audiences have. So to me, the idea of being able to walk on stage and give a truly solo performance without any other collaborators is both freeing and really important to the world we live in as 21st century humans, where technology is just part of everyday life. It really seems to go hand in hand with the life I lead, and I love the sounds that can be produced.
Well, I have to say that one of the things that drew me, although like you, I still am very engaged with acoustic music. And I want to add before I forget that we first were in touch about an acoustic piece of mine, my flute concerto, Ruach, which you actually performed as an undergraduate. So I think that one of the fascinating things here is that you're using your acoustic instrument, but you're expanding the universe of its sounds and its expressive reach by using the wonderful world of new technologies to do this. And I know that one of the things that you were curious about regarding these two pieces that you did is that they are very different. And so how do I come up with the idea for each of these pieces? And in general, how do I work? And one of the things that's important to me is collaboration. I love collaborating with different performers of all kinds and different community groups. And the first piece that you're going to be performing on this series is For the Fallen. Now, the backstory for that is that it was commissioned, believe it or no, by an Italian trumpeter, a wonderful trumpeter named Ivano Ascari, and he is based in Rovereto, Italy. And so I started talking to him about the piece, and I'm always curious about whether there's some timbral element that is of particular meaning to the performer. And he mentioned to me that in Rovereto, there is this incredible ringing bell known as the peace bell that was originally cast from cannons melted after World War I. And I've actually had the opportunity to visit it. It is enormous. It's on the top of a large hill. It's rung every day in memory of those fallen in all wars. And I was very moved by that story. And at the time, I had never been there, and I was able to obtain a recording from a sound engineer there, and I built the electronics by processing the bell. And as is the case in many of my pieces, though not all, the electronics, sometimes you can hear exactly what the source is, and then other times it's quite radically transformed. And I wonder what you found in approaching this piece. Was there anything in particular that struck you or that affected how you went about working on it?
Well, two thoughts. One is the inspiration, and one is the actual source sound material. So, in terms of the inspiration, I was really struck when you told me this story about the Rovereto peace bell. I went online, I read all about it, I tried to find recordings. There are some beautiful YouTube videos that you can go watch of people gathering around the bell when it's being rung. And I was just very struck by this inspiration. I myself am quite the pacifist. I'm vegan. I don't want to harm any living things through my life. And so this idea of honoring those who have fallen in war, whether they were soldiers or civilians, and just this message of peace really, really spoke to me personally. And so I loved that you wanted to make a flute version of this. I knew that this material would really resonate with me personally. And then in terms of the source material, the bell itself is so striking. It's so resonant. It has so much echo and reverb. And the flute has a technique that we call the bell tone attack. And so you wrote some material that allows to use that bell tone attack so that sometimes I can start mimicking the bell, which was such a smart idea on your behalf. And then the way you manipulated the sound of the original bell through the electronics includes a lot of reverb and processing, which is something that's one of my favorite elements of electronic music. I really love playing with reverb. And so getting to respond to that with my acoustic flute in playing with the electronics was a really rich and resonant and enjoyable sound world to be able to live in and roll around in and find beautiful sounds. So I really resonated with both in the inspiration and the sounds. It was a perfect pairing.
That's wonderful. What about the other piece, Penelope's song, which of course is quite different? And the inspiration for that came from reading the Odyssey and thinking about Penelope, who is mentioned very little. But one of the stories that I found intriguing was her successful effort to stave off suitors who wanted to become king, because of course Ulysses was away for 2 decades. And so one of the things she did was to say that she could not take a suitor until she finished weaving the shroud she was working on for her father-in-law. But she unraveled at night what she wove by day, so she didn't finish it. And I thought it was intriguing also that I was able to record a local weaver here in Charlottesville, Jan Russell, who does gorgeous work and works on wooden looms. Now, what's fascinating in terms of the timbre of this piece is that there is virtually nothing that I have not touched. I use the recordings, and for instance, in the opening, you can definitely hear that it is a loom. However, I processed and created rhythms out of those that didn't exist in the original. And I isolated certain of the sounds to play with. And then the piece is in 3 sections. The first and third are more rhythmic and are playing with the qualities of the loom. And the second one, although all of the sounds come from the same source, is more of an imagination on my part of her imagining her own situation. So the loom is omnipresent, but it also is woven into the acoustic part. And one of the things that I found intriguing about that was finding ways to create musical lines that intertwine in a way that's very much like weaving. And I'm curious how this very different sound world affected your approach to learning it and to what you thought about it.
Absolutely. So again, I had a really strong response to your inspiration and to your sounds. As a kid, I read Greek and Roman mythology like they were fairy tales. Those were my fairy tales as a kid. So I knew the Penelope story from my youth. And I'd actually never read the Odyssey, but once you wrote this piece for me, I actually slogged through the whole darn thing so that I could read the mentions of Penelope that are in there. So thank you for finally getting me to read that fabulous classic. What I always have liked about the Penelope story is that she's such a proto-feminist. It's such a wonderful example of how we as women can harness our latent power. And the idea that she was using like a feminine handicraft, a traditional thing like weaving, as a power play to consolidate power and not hand over the reins of her kingdom in the absence of her husband. I just find that such a wonderful message of female empowerment. So when I then heard your manipulated weaving sounds, what's really cool is that, especially in the opening section and the ending section, there's such a rhythmic drive to the way the different components of the loom go back and forth and the way you've treated them, that it really feels like a feminist rock anthem. I feel like it's slightly punk in a way, and that's an aesthetic I really enjoy. And so to find that female power in the story, and then almost feel like there's this rhythmic rocking out element that we as flute players don't get to do very much. So it's one of the reasons I truly love to play your piece, is that I feel like a bit of a rock star every time I play Penelope's song. So it's really fun to do.
Well, I think I couldn't ask for a more wonderful response to it. And I do think that the issue of the kind of rhythm, the intensity of it, does speak to my kind of response as a woman who is a composer and who in my music wants to respond to the world I'm in. So I've really come to think that, at least in my own work, my music is always related to some aspect of the world around me. There are many ways in which it can do that, but it always does have that element. And I'm so happy that you found it in that. And one of the other things that maybe we can compare notes about a little. So as a young child, I took up the flute, and it has always remained very important to me. And one of the reasons that I started composing for it was I could actually play it. Now, I am quick to say I cannot play these two pieces, at least at tempo or with anything like the finesse that you can. But still, the fact that I actually have an instrument that I can experiment on myself, I think has been very meaningful to me, because one of the things that draws me most as a composer is timbre, is the experience of timbre, is the emotional resonance of timbre, which of course we have in our own voices, but every sound in the world we experience emotionally in some way. And then how we put that together, of course, in creating music, it's for me a wonderful combination of structure, which is the mind, and the experience, the resonances that has. Now, one other thing that I was curious about, going back to For the Fallen, is that I used a combination of flexible and exact timing. And I did that because I really felt that I wanted the performer to be able to engage with the kind of flow. But I wonder how you felt about that and how that affected your experience.
Sure. I really like the way you've set up For the Fallen. So from a performer's perspective, I run a little stopwatch on my music stand so that I see where I'm tracking. But primarily, I'm not staring at the numbers going by. I'm primarily actually listening to the track and responding to it the way I would with a live chamber collaborator, which is pretty fun considering most of the time for performances of an electroacoustic nature, I'm on the stage by myself. So to have that sort of interactive feeling with a fixed media soundtrack is really quite extraordinary. And the way you've treated time in that piece, with some things being very free and some elements being more structured, really allows for that sort of freedom. Oftentimes with fixed media, it's all about hitting it perfectly and okay, this goes right here and this goes right here. And that experience can be really fun, but it often feels a lot more like playing an etude than making music. And this really allows for a lot of experimentation and interpretation. I don't feel like any performance of For the Fallen has ever sounded like any other performance. And that's a real luxury within this medium. And in that respect, because you wrote Penelope for me first, the second section of Penelope is more free as well and has that sort of sensation. There's no stopwatch running for that piece for me, but I am responding to the soundtrack, the fixed media in that respect. And so I feel like you gave me a little teaser sampler of how to engage with this sort of writing from you, so that I was really prepared for the full immersive For the Fallen experience.
I see. Wonderful. Well, I've also worked with interactive media, and in fact have a flute piece called Kairos for amplified flute that only plays with the sound in real time. So there is no having to track at all. But it's really interesting. There are, of course, performance issues that are different for the two of these methods. And they each have their affordances, but they each also have their technical issues. When you're dealing with interactive media, it can be a bit more tricky. But one of the reasons why I was excited to create these pieces for flute is that the range of the flute is so incredibly wide. And I think traditionally, it wasn't always treated that way. It can be angry, it can be wild, it can be insane, it can be pastoral, it can be calm. It just has a very large range of possible sound worlds that it can inhabit. And so I love being able to play with that and expand on it and just see where it leads. And there are so many things also one can do just with one's voice in relation to the flute. So it's really a kind of wonderful universe of timbral possibilities. And when that's coupled with collaborating with someone who loves to explore like you do, that is one of my favorite aspects of being a composer. Anything else you would like to add about these performances that might help our audience understand or be aware of?
I would love to just say that the collaboration process with you on both of these pieces was so fun, especially because you do have a flute background. I remember in a first draft of actually both pieces, you had gotten out the flute and had been like, okay, well, I tried trilling these couple of fingers and I got a cool sound. Does that work? And it was so fun to work with a composer who's willing to get out the instrument and mess around, because that's one of my favorite things to do. And in our collaborations, I think we really found some sounds that were striking and that I still haven't really heard anywhere else. So I think that that made the experience really unique. And so I just really do appreciate that. As a performer of new music, my favorite thing is to collaborate. And I always want to walk out on stage and feel like I'm just going towards a score that I had a tiny hand in and towards a friend on the music stand. And I feel like that every time I play your works, Judith. So that means a great deal to me.
Well, to me as well. Thank you so much. So now that we've given this backstory, let's move ahead with the performances, first of For the Fallen and then Penelope's song. Thank you.